The crown prince was supposed to choose a bride from his kingdom, but his heart betrayed him for a Yoruba stranger. Now, with twins born in defiance and a throne hanging in the balance, their forbidden love would either shatter his dynasty or force it to evolve. The air in the Victoria Island Gallery was a curated chill, a silent battle against the Lagos humidity that pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Prince Chuka of Mwofa moved through the space, a figure of polished composure. To the city's elite, he was a visionary, the Oxford-educated crown prince who ran a multi-billion naira venture capital firm from his minimalist Ikoyi penthouse. His home was a testament to this identity, a symphony of polished concrete, bespoke African mahogany joinery, and bold, contemporary art. An otherworldly textile sculpture by El Anisu shimmered beside a wall of glass that framed the endless, twinkling energy of the lagoon. This apartment was his sanctuary, a declaration of a modern monarchy he dreamed of leading. But here, surrounded by the ghostly scent of drying paint and fine wine, he could momentarily forget the weight of the coral-beaded crown that awaited him back in Mwofa. His phone vibrated incessantly in his pocket, another message from the palace steward, no doubt, about the upcoming IWAG festival and the urgent need to finalize the list of eligible daughters from the noble families. He silenced it with a grimace. It was then, in a quieter corner of the gallery, that he saw her. She stood before a fiery, impasto-laden canvas by a Blade Glover, a splash of golden yellows and deep reds. She was a study in contrast herself, dressed in an architectural interpretation of a Yoruba iro and buba, the indigo fabric structured and sharp, yet flowing. She wasn't just observing the painting. She was dissecting it, her head tilted, her fingers subtly tracing its energy in the air. He makes the heat feel like an embrace, doesn't he? Her voice was a low, clear melody that cut through the gallery's whisper. Not a threat, but a promise. A new son. Chuka, who was so often the initiator, the prince holding court, found himself utterly disarmed. He had been about to quote the artist's statement. She had articulated the painting's soul. You see beyond the pigment, he managed, moving to stand beside her. Her name was Fumi Adebayo. She was an architect, he learned, her reputation built on foundations as solid as the brutalist forms she loved, forms she softened with the intricate patterns and philosophies of her Yoruba heritage. Over espressos that turned into a dinner at a rooftop restaurant, she dissected his world with a fearless curiosity. So, Your Highness, she teased, her eyes glinting with mischief under the fairy lights, is that penthouse of yours a home or a statement? A carefully staged set for the modern prince narrative? He laughed, a sound so genuinely free it surprised even him. Later, in his kitchen, a marvel of Italian marble and hidden smart tech, they debated the sacred tenets of jollof rice, her laughter echoing off the custom cabinetry as she declared his Igbo method charmingly misguided. In his living room, nestled into the deep embrace of a velvet sofa beneath the sculptural glow of an Oluwamoda metal light piece, they shared more than dreams. They shared a vision of a Nigeria where heritage was a springboard, not a shackle. That night, driving through the pulsating lights of Lagos, Chuka felt a terrifying, exhilarating certainty. This was not a distraction. This was a reckoning. And the carefully constructed future his family had planned was about to collide with the one his heart demanded. The journey to Mwofa was a transition through time, the chaotic energy of Lagos slowly giving way to the lush, rolling hills of Igbo land. Chuka navigated the smooth, newly tarred roads in his Range Rover, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Fumi, usually a fountain of conversation, was quiet, her gaze fixed on the vibrant green landscape. Remember, Chuka said, breaking the silence, the palace isn't what you might expect. He was right. The royal palace of Mwofa was not a relic. It was a stunning declaration of progress, a complex of low-slung, geometric buildings with soaring, vaulted roofs made of native stone and polished concrete. Water cascaded down a sleek black granite wall into a koi-filled reflecting pool in the main courtyard, a modern homage to the river goddess. It was a place where tradition and the future were in a deliberate, and often tense, dialogue. They were received in the main living area, a vast room where the air was scented with native incense and lemonwood polish. The furniture was a blend of deep, comfortable sofas and chairs carved with the sinuous forms of leopards and eagles, their ancient symbols reimagined in clean, contemporary lines. Queen Neoma, elegant and poised in a simple but exquisite acquit wrapper and blouse, greeted them with a smile that was perfectly measured, not quite reaching the worry in her eyes. The initial conversation was a delicate dance. Izuto Henry, a man whose broad shoulders still carried the authority of a warrior, sat in his high-backed chair, a masterpiece of traditional carving upholstered in a stark, modern gray suede. He asked Fumi about her work, his voice a low rumble. Fumi, her nerves steeled by passion, spoke eloquently about her designs, about using laterite bricks and cross-ventilation as Yoruba architects had for centuries, but framing them in bold, new ways. A bridge between the old and the new, Izuto mused, nodding slowly. A noble pursuit. For a fleeting moment, Chuka dared to hope. The hope was a tiny, fragile flame. It was extinguished when the topic turned to family. The steward brought in a tray of palm wine and garden egg. Izuto took a slow sip, his eyes settling on his son. Our traditions are the pillars that hold up this throne, Chuka, he began, his tone shifting from conversational to declarative. They are not decorations to be admired. They are the load-bearing walls. The Ozo, the future Is, must marry from within the kingdom. The source of the royal bloodline must be known, its roots deep in our own soil. It is a matter of legacy, of stability. The word friendship was used then, a deliberate, cold dismissal of the love that burned between Chuka and Fumi. It was a word that relegated their relationship to a temporary, insignificant liaison. Later, in the private family quarters adorned with abstract art inspired by Uli body paintings, Neoma confronted her son. The regal composure had cracked, revealing a mother's anguish. Chuka, Nam, she is brilliant. She is beautiful, Neoma pleaded, her voice hushed and urgent. But she is Yoruba. The council, the Ndaiki, they will see it as a dilution. The kingdom will see it as a rejection of our own. They will not accept a queen whose tongue forms our proverbs with a foreign melody. This path leads only to thorns. The drive back to Lagos was a funeral procession for Chuka's hopes. The silence in the car was a physical weight. He glanced at Fumi, her profile outlined against the passing night. She had been assessed, measured, and found wanting not on her character, but on her origin. The vibrant, shared space of his penthouse now felt less like a home and more like a fortress, its beautiful interiors a front for the siege that was to come. The coldness of the palace had seeped into his bones, and he knew, with a sinking certainty, that the real battle had just begun. The royal summons came not as a scroll, but as a stark text message from the palace steward. Your presence is required. His Royal Majesty's private chambers. 4 p.m. The formality was a weapon. When Chuka arrived, the modern elegance of the palace felt like a gilded cage. The water feature's gentle cascades sounded like a countdown. Izuto Henry stood before the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the ancestral groves, his back to his son. This attachment has reached its conclusion, Chuka, he stated, his voice echoing in the sparsely furnished room. Your duty is to your people, not to a fleeting passion that threatens the very foundation of this throne. And the words were not a request, they were a decree. Chuka felt the two halves of his soul tearing apart. He looked at his father, the king, the living embodiment of a 1,000-year lineage, and then he thought of Fumi, her intellect, her courage, the future they envisioned in the blueprints of their shared dreams. He made his choice in the ringing silence that followed. He would not renounce his birthright, but he would not surrender his heart. He gave his father a slow, deep nod that conveyed neither acceptance nor defiance, but a final, unshakable resolve. The scandal erupted with the force of a tropical storm. The news broke first in the hushed, gleeful tones of Lagos society blogs. Crown Prince chooses love over throne? Then came the furious editorials in traditional Igbo newspapers, decrying the betrayal of sacred trust. Invitations to state functions and exclusive launches dried up. His phone, once a constant stream of business and social chatter, fell into a chilling silence, broken only by terse, formal updates from the palace steward. Yet, within their sun-drenched penthouse fortress, They built their own kingdom. Fumi's touch became the dominant architecture of their lives. A magnificent, hand-dyed Adair tapestry in shades of indigo and rust now dominated the living room wall, its Yoruba motifs a bold statement against the minimalist gray backdrop. The bespoke Irako wood dining table, a wedding gift from her family, became the heart of their home, its sturdy, warm surface bearing witness to late-night conversations and shared meals. Their love was their law, their defiance a quiet, determined flame that needed no outside validation. They built a world within a world, a sanctuary of mutual respect and ambition. And from that profound union came a double blessing. Fumi gave birth to robust, healthy twins, a boy and a girl with their father's curious eyes and their mother's serene smile. They named them Kenechukwu, thank God, and Ifeoluwa, the love of God. Chuka held his son and daughter for the first time, their tiny fingers curling around his, and he knew a love more powerful than any tradition, more binding than any crown. He sent a simple text message to his mother, a photograph of the two sleeping infants. There was no immediate reply. The silence from Mwofa was now a palpable presence in the room, a cold shadow stretching across the beautiful, defiant home they had built, waiting to see if it would be broken by the weight of a kingdom's disapproval or warmed by the irresistible pull of new life. The photograph arrived on Queen Neoma's phone with a soft chime, a stark contrast to the heavy silence of the palace. It was a simple image, two sleeping newborns, their faces serene, swaddled in soft white cotton against the rich, familiar backdrop of her son's velvet sofa. Kenechukwu and Ifeoluwa. The names, when she whispered them, felt like a prayer and a condemnation on her lips. 4 days, the palace had felt less like a home and more like a museum of their failure. The modern, open-plan design she had once loved now seemed to amplify the emptiness. The sound of the waterfall in the courtyard, once soothing, now echoed the constant, dripping worry in her heart. She watched her husband, the mighty Izudo, retreat into a silence more profound than any she had known. He spent hours sitting in his study, the sleek tablet before him dark and unused, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the manicured gardens. The weight of the throne seemed to be crushing him, not from the burden of rule, but from the absence of his son's laughter and the future he had been promised. The ache in Neoma's heart, once a dull throb, sharpened into a physical pain. It was a maternal hunger, a primal need to hold her blood. The arguments of tradition, the whispers of the Ndaiki Council, began to sound like brittle, ancient parchment next to the vibrant, undeniable truth of that photograph. She did not announce her visit. She simply had the driver bring her to Lagos, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs the entire way. Standing before the familiar door of Chuka's penthouse, she smoothed her expensive acquit wrapper, a futile attempt to compose the storm within. The door opened, and the world shifted. The scene was one of beautiful, chaotic domesticity. Chuka, her crown prince son, stood in the middle of the living room, his tailored shirts replaced by a simple, soft t-shirt, a small form draped over his shoulder as he gently patted its back. His focus was absolute, his expression one of tender, unguarded love. On the large sectional sofa, Fumi sat, looking exhausted yet radiant, cradling the other twin to her chest. The sleek, modern interior she remembered was now animated with life. A sleek, minimalist baby monitor blinked on the console, a stylish diaper bag was slung over a Mies van der Rohe chair, and the scent of baby powder mingled with the familiar aroma of fine coffee. Chuka looked up, and his eyes widened. Ni, he whispered, the single word laden with a universe of hope, fear, and longing. Neoma did not speak. Words were useless. She simply walked past him, her regal composure dissolving with every step. She reached for the baby on his shoulder, her hands, once adorned only with royal signets, now trembling as she took the weight of her grandson. Little Kenechukwu was warm and solid in her arms. He made a small, sleepy sound, his head nuzzling into the silk of her blouse. A single, hot tear escaped, tracing a path down her carefully composed cheek and landing on the baby's forehead. It was an unspoken blessing, an apology, a surrender. The ice that had encased her heart for months shattered in that instant. She looked from her grandson to Fumi, And for the first time, she did not see a Yoruba woman. She saw the mother of her grandchildren, the woman who loved her son with a strength that had defied a kingdom. The crack in the wall of tradition had begun not with a shout, but with the quiet, overwhelming power of a grandmother's tear. Izudo Henry's arrival at the penthouse was announced not by a royal procession, but by the quiet purr of a black Mercedes. He came alone, dressed not in regalia, but in a simple, well-tailored Iziagu tunic over trousers. He was a king stripped of his public armor, a grandfather entering his son's home. Chuka greeted him at the door, the tension between them a living thing. But Izudo's eyes swept past him, taking in the scene Neoma had described. He saw the Adair tapestry, no longer an intrusion but a vibrant part of the whole. He saw the Irako wood table, its surface now bearing the gentle scars of baby bottles and the vibrant colors of Fumi's architectural folios. His gaze finally settled on Fumi herself, who met his eyes not with defiance, but with a quiet, steady grace as she gently rocked Ifeoluwa in her arms. He spent an hour there, in silence mostly. He watched Fumi soothe his granddaughter with a soft, ancient Yoruba lullaby, the melody weaving strangely and beautifully with the modern Igbo highlife playing softly from a hidden speaker. He saw the way Chuka's hand would instinctively find the small of Fumi's back, a gesture of united strength. The fortress he had feared was, in truth, a home, strong, loving, and unapologetically Nigerian. Later, he stood with Chuka on the balcony, the sprawling, relentless energy of Lagos stretching before them. It was a Nigeria he had sometimes struggled to understand, a world away from the sacred groves of Mwofa. A king's first duty is to his people, Izudo began, his voice a low rumble, weathered by the burden of kingship. I have spent my life believing that duty was to preserve the past, unchanged. To build walls to protect it. He turned to his son, his eyes, usually so impenetrable, glistening with a profound and painful clarity. But a father's first duty is to his heart. I failed in the latter, thinking it would compromise the former. I was wrong. He placed a heavy hand on Chuka's shoulder. These children, Kenechukwu and Ifeoluwa, they are not a dilution of our bloodline. They are its expansion. They are a bridge. They are the future, Chuka. A future that is already here, in this home. Bring them home. The reconciliation was not a quiet affair. It was a jubilant coronation of a new era. The Mwofa Palace, with its modern halls, was filled with a symphony it had never heard before, the vibrant, swirling colors of Yoruba aso-oak and the electrifying rhythms of a talking drum in conversation with a Dundan. Fumi's family, initially wary, were welcomed with open arms and overflowing calabashes of palm wine. The royal staff, who had once whispered in disapproval, now competed for the chance to hold the twins, their hearts stolen by the gummy smiles of the future prince and princess. On a day blessed by a gentle, golden sun, Izudo Henry, his frame frail but his spirit luminous with a final, profound peace, stood before his council and the gathered kingdom. In one arm, he held Kenechukwu, who gurgled and reached for the red coral beads around his grandfather's neck. In the other, he cradled Ifeoluwa, her tiny fist clutching his finger with a surprising strength. Behold! His voice, though raspy, carried across the courtyard with the full, unassailable authority of his throne. My heirs, my blood. Their mother, Fumi, is now a daughter of Mwofa. She has shown us that the strongest kingdoms are not built by keeping people out, but by building bridges of strength and love. Our legacy is not diminished, it is multiplied. Chuka stood beside Fumi, his hand firmly in hers, their twins a living testament between them. They had weathered the storm, and from its turbulence, they had not just won acceptance. They had forged a new, more beautiful tradition. The love that began in a gallery, nurtured within the defiant walls of a modern Nigerian home, was now the very heart of a throne. Before Izudo Henry joined the ancestors, he found his greatest peace not in the silent halls of tradition, but in the joyful, united cries of his grandchildren, the future he had once feared, but now embraced with all his heart.